Cashflow Diary podcast, episode 488.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because here's the thing. When you are out there building your business, which I believe you're doing, you're building your cash flow, doing your thing in the various ways that we all as entrepreneurs like to do it, which is great. One of the things that we are always doing is trying to eliminate risk, meaning, well, we don't want to just have, say, one supplier for whatever widget that we're selling, or we don't want to just have one customer because, oh my goodness, should they be the majority of our revenue or the large portion and they suddenly go away, that means our business goes away. Well, here's another concept that I want to submit for your acceptance. What about the idea of having everything that you own, everything that you are, all of your assets and everything tied to one country? Does that sound like a risk? It could be. And because of that, there could be a need in your future, my future, somebody's future, in some way, shape, or form to make sure that, well, that's not necessarily the case. Or maybe you just want a little bit more freedom and you don't want to be forced to stay in a particular country because that's where everything is and that's how you know how to operate. Here's what I'm saying. Having had the privilege of being able to grow up overseas and most importantly travel the world at a very young age and also older, we as Americans aren't as well citizens of the entire world. And I think it's a thing that all of us can benefit from. Most importantly, how do you do it? And in fact, some of you probably would like to own real estate in a foreign country too. Well, there's requirements. But before we get into all of that, I want you to know that today's guest is kind of an expert on that very thing. In fact, they got a book about it because at the end of the day, what it comes down to is you may want that freedom like a nomad, but you still want to be able to go out there and earn money like a capitalist. In fact, he wrote a book. The title is Nomad Capitalist, How to Reclaim Your Freedom with Offshore Bank Accounts, Dual Citizenship, Foreign Companies, and Overseas Investments. I am, of course, talking about Andrew Henderson, and what I'm excited about is the fact that not only do we get to talk to him, but do you understand that one of the interesting things I think that exists is that when you ask him, hey, how you doing? You also have to ask him, hey, where are you? Because he's probably somewhere else in the world. Here's the deal, though. There's a strategy to it. There's understanding that goes behind it. But most importantly, let's get ready to listen, to learn, and to love Andrew Henderson. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Great to be with you.
So I guess if I wanted to live abroad, I shouldn't just pick up and go, is what you're saying.
Well, I think there's a value to picking up and going. I think there's a value to diving in. I mean, it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who is just out of university, and he is figuring out that this corporate world that he went to college, got himself into debt to get into, has now landed him at a boardroom table sitting around doing corporate jargon every day, and he hates it. And so I think that's why you're here. That's why I'm here. That's why your listeners are here, is we don't want the corporate jargon. We want to do our own thing. And I think that the difference between us and those people is that we dive in. But I think that there's a way to create a strategy to where you're not going to make the mistakes, at least on a financial level, that come from going and doing business going and getting to the tax system, going and doing a lot of things in other countries and other cultures. So diving in terms of just getting out there, I think is great. But when it comes to the financial ramifications, obviously there's more to it than just hoping for the best.
It would not make a good plan. Totally understood. Now, before we get too far in it, and because this is your first time here, what I've got to do is I've got to ask you the same question that I tend to ask everybody the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
Go ahead, please.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes, if you will. So if you think, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc., and because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, there are, you can say as an entrepreneur that I can occasionally imagine myself flying around town, using our products and services, saving our customers. And yes, maybe I am wearing a cape, but who cares? At the same time, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. If you think about Spider-Man, for example, there was a time he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing, taking some photos. And then one day something special happens to him, decides, oh my gosh, I have this special superhuman ability, and I get to choose whether I'm going to use it for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. But before, traveling the world, before being featured in, Forbes, Bloomberg, before the book, before all the things, before even being able to cutting your tax rate, doing all the things that people know you for today, what we want to know is, who's Andrew Henderson?
Well, I hate to think back to those days when I was paying all that money. But my story starts in childhood. And I think that my advantage growing up, there were certain things I didn't learn. There were certain things I wish I would have learned, wish my parents would have taught me. But one thing they taught me was the idea of thinking outside of borders. And I like to say, go where you're treated best. Those are what we call the 5 magic words. That's my thing. And I learned that from my father. It was kind of an accident. I was 11, 12 years old. And the idea was that if this is a place that doesn't really serve you, go to the place that best serves you. Don't settle for second best, for third best, for 10th best. We have this great idea in our minds, and the United States is right up there on the list of perpetrators of this, is that our country is the best. The reality is when we start to look at it in relation to 195 other countries, our country really isn't the best in anything, let alone everything. And so especially when it comes to investing, why not go where we're best? Why not go to the number one place? And so that's an idea that I started ruminating on at 12 years old. Perhaps that's why I wasn't as popular in 7th grade. But I've been working on it for about 22 years now.
So, okay. I like what okay. So the thing that's coming through my head right now is you're basically saying that there's an assumption that we all make and it's a bias simply because of where we've been, because we never question. Like, I've never thought about questioning. Now I have questioned, am I in the best state for business? Because we all know that California isn't it. But I haven't thought about, am I in the best country for investment? That's an interesting thought process. Please elaborate some more.
Well, let's look at, California, for example. A lot of people who are running businesses in California come to me because they've had the idea of moving to Florida, but that doesn't really solve the problem in that big of a way. You've still got federal tax. They can change that anytime they want. You've got Social Security. You've got Medicare. You've got regulations. Now you have this all these tariffs that Trump is bringing in. And so the idea is, we are all really conditioned from childhood that we should be patriots. We should salute the flag. We should basically ignore everything that's going on in the world. And I think that we have this tendency to take the smallest of things happening in other countries and turn it into big issues, where we take the big issues in our country and turn them into small issues. It's funny. I had a guy today who contacted me, and he said, I'm afraid to invest in Turkey. Turkey has this new citizenship program. He says, I'm afraid because of the president. He's kind of a wild guy. I said, as opposed to where you're living in the United States, where the president is, doing he's doing all kinds of things. This guy is totally. No, I'm not on either side of the spectrum, right? I'm not here anti-Trump or pro-Trump, but to say that
Sure.
other country, this guy's a wild guy. I mean, listen, the property market in Istanbul, I think, has enjoyed 2 decades of almost unparalleled, unmitigated growth. So, I mean, is this guy going to tank the economy? I mean, so I think that's what I'm talking about, is the programming, that somehow we ignore everything that's going wrong in our country. And I'm not saying that we should hate our country, but what I'm saying is we are programmed to be patriotic. And isn't it amazing how, whether me right now in the Republic of Georgia, you in the United States, or anyone else listening, isn't it amazing how most people outside of our doors would say, yep, this is the best place. But how come we all live in the best place?
I'm finding myself thinking because this just the concept of, because I mean, no matter where you're from, and the people that I talk to anyway, we're all excited. This is, I mean, I was in Cleveland, Ohio, not too long ago, and they were all fired. I'm like, this is not. I'm looking at Cleveland like, hey, I mean, it's great, but it's not California. It's not. I mean, it's not the places that I've been, but yet the people there are like, oh, this is the best place ever. So I then
are they really saying that? I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and as I've said, there's one when you say I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, the only acceptable response is, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no one said that when I was there at all. No one said that at all. They were really, really fired up for their city.
People are pumped up about it now. They win one championship in 53 years, and suddenly it's back to everyone loves it. Okay.
That, I guess, that's just kind of how it is now. But okay, so I gotta understand though. I mean, here's what's going through my head. All right, when I have to break down that assumption, if I'm breaking down an assumption, I'm starting over at zero. There's, as you said, 195 different countries. There's a lot that we have learned just by being where we grew up. I mean, between the legal status, the laws, there's just an overwhelming amount of information that's going through my head of learning how to operate in foreign territory. This is clearly something you have mastered. But before we get into that, I'm kind of curious. Why do it? What is the reason behind you wanting to live abroad, so to speak, or live wherever you feel like it, or wherever you're treated best?
Well, I think there are a number of different elements I want to make sure that we consider. I mean, you, for example, can live in California and you could be investing in the Republic of Georgia or Turkey or Cambodia or any of the other number of higher probability places where potentially, landlord-tenant laws, better yields are lower. Unfortunately, as a U.S. citizen, taxes being lower doesn't really benefit you. But you can invest; you never have to leave. You can set up companies in other countries. You can set up bank accounts in other countries, or you can do what I have done, and you can leave the U.S. You can expatriate. You can hand back the passport, and you can go and live a full-fledged international life. And so, any or all of those could benefit you, and you're probably not just going to renounce your U.S. citizenship tomorrow and move all of your assets to somewhere else. But I think that, as you said, dipping your toe in and starting small, perhaps opening a bank account somewhere else, seeing how that feels. I think that there's a way to acclimate yourself to where you will slowly be comfortable with the idea of, if I can own a garden rise apartment building in Cleveland, why not own one in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where the economy has grown every year for 25 years without a recession? Why can't I do that? Why can't I make 22% a year like someone I know just did last year in plain vanilla apartments? So I think that starting at zero is scary, but there's a way to slowly build up and dip your toe in and do one thing after another. And you'll realize that it's really not that difficult. And I look back, the first time I set up a bank account somewhere else, I think I went in and I wired like $5,000. And I'm checking like every hour, when's the money arriving? Just recently, I just bought another house in Montenegro where I'm going to be spending summers. And the banker called to confirm the wire, 6-figure wire. I'm just like, yeah, it'll be fine. All right, okay, send it. I have a lady who's my property manager. She sets it up. The contract's done. I barely pay attention because I know I have the right systems in place. And it's actually more comfortable for me than as sitting here selling off my final U.S. properties.
Okay, so take us on this journey, if you will. How do we go from, rephrase, how do you go from Cleveland, and we'll call it the American cocoon for now, to let's spread my wings and I'm comfortable, it sounds like, operating anywhere?
This is where I think I had a bit of an unfair advantage, is that I grew up looking at maps. I grew up traveling. We did international travel. And so I already had that piece ready. I mean, yeah, we all know those friends who the idea of going to Mexico for the weekend sounds really freaky. So, I mean, if that's the piece.
Sorry, that's funny, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the piece standing in your way, go down to Mexico. You're not going to be blown away. Go down, spend a weekend, spend a week. So I think that what people in my business sometimes don't assume is, do you have a U.S. passport, or do you have a passport from whatever country you're a citizen? Okay, get that. Start traveling. Do what you need to feel comfortable. If you don't like flying, get over that. But once you've conquered the idea of the world is an open place, what I really did that helped me was I started to make observations in all these different places that I went, where I would say, oh, interest rates are higher at the banks here, or, oh, people seem more educated about this particular issue over here, or, oh, it seems like it's a lot faster to register property here. And I think that making those observations, you figure out what works for you. So it really depends on what your goals are. If you're saying, I want to build my cash flow business somewhere else, well, is that an investment business? Okay, well, what kind of profile do you have? Do you want higher yielding properties? How high yield do you want to go? I mean, but if it's a business, if it's an online business, if you're making stuff, selling it on Amazon, where do I want to run that company from? Am I going to set up that company in Hong Kong or the British Virgin Islands or somewhere else to where I can dramatically reduce my tax? I think that establishing the objectives before you dive in is important. What am I trying to accomplish? And then it's just a matter of figuring out which puzzle pieces can go in that basket.
Yeah, it just seems there's just so many things that are suddenly now on the table all of a sudden. I mean, because I think about, the last time I was even considering things like this, and the Republican judge actually came up because at the time the interest rates on just simple savings accounts were insanely phenomenal, and I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting reason, but all of it seems challenging. How does one navigate or even begin to come up with their own criteria on something like this? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey, and what I want to say to you is that the number one mistake that I have ever made in business, number one, has been waiting too long to do the books, waiting too long to get the bookkeepers, the accountants, the CPAs, the CFOs involved, and I don't want you to make that same mistake. That mistake cost me over 6 figures, and now for a significant discount, you have the ability to get your books together using FreshBooks. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. Again, that's gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary. FreshBooks is the easy to use software designed to help you, the small business owner, the freelancer, get organized and save time on invoicing, getting paid faster, keeping those books in order so that it becomes a bonus for you to do your taxes as opposed to a burden. Go over to gofreshbooks.com/cashflow diary and get started today. And now let's get back to the rest of the story.
Well, what I've done at Nomad Capitalist is basically help people identify what are they looking to accomplish. So let's say someone comes and says, Andrew, I'm running this cash flow business and I'm in California. I'm paying almost half my income in taxes. My goal is to eliminate that income in taxes. Someone came to me recently and said, you know what, I'm willing to live overseas, but I don't want to live in a hut. I don't want to live in an emerging country. I want luxuries. I want Gucci. I want nice stuff. And I said, okay, we can do that. And I think that at that point, you can hire someone to just help you work backwards, because do you really care if the company is based in Hong Kong, the BVI, or Timbuktu at that point? You just want the objective. So I think that, you have to be willing to run towards something, as I often say. If the idea is, I hate it here, there has to be a positive thing that you're running towards. And so, Georgia, hey, I want to make more money on my savings so that I can do X, Y, or Z with that money. I have a 10% CD right now, and I think that I'll actually make money on the currency fluctuation against the dollar in the next year. Wow. So it'll be more than 10%. Other countries like Armenia, same kind of thing. And then there are other countries that pay you 10% or 12% and they suck. And you should avoid them like the plague. Right?
No, I get it. I'm just, it just seems like that would be an immense amount of research to pull off on any one topic. Like if we were just looking for the best interest rates on banks, etc. I mean, yeah, you can look at the number, but then you have to understand how their banks work and what it takes to actually identify and get an account there, and all of those things to be able to compare those things seems massive. You just must have either a very large brain or database or something going on.
Well, I mean, this is what we do here, and here's the reality. I mean, we don't need to necessarily know every 196 country, all their banks, right? I mean, so there you go. Georgia, Armenia, two countries that I like. I think it's not a matter of knowing every option. I think that's when we really get into analysis paralysis. I think it's a matter of saying, you know what? Yeah, if you're a saver like me, yeah, I'm sick and tired of making 1.8%. That's like the good interest rate these days, it seems. I'm tired of making 1.8%. What can I do if I just want to keep money in the bank? Well, you go to Georgia, you get 3%. I think that the issue that people get hung up on is, what are the laws? How do things work? And yes, laws are different. I mean, the U.S. has this common law system that is present in countries that were British influenced. It's not is common in many other countries. But the idea that, I'm going to go and put my money in a bank in Georgia that's going to be taken, I think is part of the core issue that we're not used to where anywhere outside of where we're from. It's like we think that our country is like the edge of the earth, and it's like sailing off the edge of the earth into the dragon pit that we heard about from the flat earth crowd. Remember, the 15th century? It's like if you circumnavigated the globe, you'd fall into the dragons. And so, banking in Georgia works pretty similarly to banking in the United States. You put your money in, there's certain protections and there's certain things that you have to do. You get a debit card and you're on your way. Now, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're going to have to report that bank account on a form every year to the Treasury Department. Not that difficult to do. But I think that the core notion is that somehow every other place is different. And yes, there are different cultures, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, things generally function the same. And I think especially as entrepreneurs, we do ourselves a disservice because we think of ourselves as so unique and that we're so different, but really we're all similar as people. Countries are all pretty similar. Yes, there are countries that are in the middle of war. I'm not saying you should go and put your money in an account in, Sierra Leone. But barring that, I think things they function rather similarly.
Okay. So there are two things that are going through my head now as I'm thinking about it. Because we're in the short-term rental space, part of the reason that we even do what we do from a real estate perspective is because I know that my wife specifically is looking forward to having international business interests, specifically of any kind. She just wants to not be in the U.S., and I've always said to myself, okay, cool. If things get bad where we are, I want to have an option to go somewhere else, but I don't want to have to quote unquote start over. So therefore I want to have a business of some kind wherever we go. And typically, just because of my background, it has something to do with real estate in some way, shape, or form, which then leads me to, all right, I got to go buy property in a foreign country and know how business is done there. With that being said, it feels like, and maybe this is just me and my own bias, and I just don't know what I don't know. It feels like everything is so foreign, like just so different. From how you hold title to how you even qualify to be able to purchase, and own real estate, say in a country like, Mexico, for example. Not that I speak Spanish, but I just know my wife does, and she would she would not object to something of that nature. It is part of what you guys do help navigate even that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that understanding, number one, where to go is important. And I think that here's
where to
really
go?
Well, I think understanding, what serves your needs. So if I'm going to buy property, Mexico is probably not on the top of my list for the reason that, there are more restrictions. It is a bit more Byzantine. And again, I don't want to be an infomercial for the Republic of Georgia, but you buy a property.
Hey, it is what it is. If that's the truth, it's the truth. It's fine.
Well, in terms of countries where you can come, you can identify a property. Now, there are some cultural things in terms of how to negotiate with people. You have to understand, people in Georgia, they might sell their house one time in their life. So that's true in a lot of parts of Eastern Europe. So there's a different way of negotiating. There's a different culture. People change their mind a bit more. But once you get the deal done, the government side, you go, you pay them money, sometimes cash. Sometimes you'll take $50,000 in cash to the government building, the most efficient government building in the world. You'll register your title, and you can pay like $20 to have it registered on your name in 3 or 4 days, or like $50 to have it registered in a matter of hours. And then you're done. You pay the guy in dollars. You own the property. Foreigners can own property. If you don't have income in Georgia, you don't pay property tax. You don't have to figure that out. And, we help people where we have the lawyers, we have the accountants. If you're earning, income, if you're selling the property for a capital gain in the future, we can help you do all of that. I'm not necessarily in the investment game just for that one reason only, but I would go back to your earlier example of we want to live outside of the United States. Well, let's talk about the different puzzle pieces. Mm-hmm. You might be able to use that, that Cleveland, Ohio income property portfolio to fund you overseas. Now, that's not going to be as tax optimized as, having perhaps property somewhere else, but, property investment is not the worst tax situation for someone in the United States. I mean, running a business is much worse generally. So perhaps you have a relatively tax optimized U.S. property portfolio that funds you while you go and live and explore other places. And perhaps you start that online business, the cash flow business, and then you put that while you're living overseas into some kind of foreign corporation. So now you get some tax advantages from that. So, I'm not saying don't have U.S. rental property. What I'm saying is consider a mix of different countries. Maybe you have property here, you live here, you have a company that's set up for your active business over here, you're banking over here, and you're not stuck to one country. That's the process. I don't want to own assets in the U.S. for the most part. I've had a pretty bad time in the U.S. I've never had a losing investment overseas ever. The U.S. has been more difficult for me since I'm not there. But the point is, I mean, you don't have to. I'm not saying abandon the United States. I'm saying be open to the best opportunities. And if the best place for property for you is Cleveland or L.A. or Knoxville or wherever, so be it. But let's add some diversity to the rest of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was headed, is because I don't dislike what, real estate in the U.S., but I was going in my head, if I go to another country, I want to also have the same experience, or at least the same lifestyle, or the ability to generate an income, should that be, in that particular jurisdiction as well. Now, we're talking about a lot of many different things, and there's something that's in the back of my head and wondering if, like, in your world, if it seems like to me that it would fit, but I just don't know. So I'm going to ask, does, real estate has its levels of complication, but when I start to think about assets and cash and value, I can't help but think about things like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, etc. And I'm wondering if in your world that even has a role.
Well, I do, and I'll go back to your earlier point just very quickly. I mean, I think that you are correct that it's always easier in my world is people who are already successful. People come to me because they already have some kind of income, some kind of wealth they want to protect. They want to keep more of it. They want to grow their stuff faster. Obviously, there's a whole world of folks, the digital nomads, and I'm friends with many of these many of the influencers in that space, and that's great. But these are the people, the digital nomads. This is where, they quit their job, they save $5,000, and then they go live in the cheapest place they can find to figure out how to, hack their way to $1,000 a month income to pay the bills before that runway runs out. That's fantastic. I love it. Obviously, what I'm in, both from personal experience, having sold businesses in the U.S. and leaving with money, and whom I work with now, is you're right. It's a lot easier to just start with that either wealth or cash flow behind you.
Right.
So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Got it. Now, and with that being said, is there you mentioned 5,000 in bootstrapping, is there, if you were to, knowing what you know today, if someone was planning on doing something like this, is there a dollar amount, a net worth amount, a revenue amount, or something that you go, okay, around this amount it begins to make sense, or it begins to be an easy transition?
Well, again, I think, so I have my niche of who I would help and who I can really get results for. And I would say you've got to be making at least, $250,000 a year. To answer your point about cryptocurrencies and stuff like that, yes, we have people who do that. I'm not the number one proponent of that stuff. I think it's, as with anything else, part of the mix. Sure. I take a somewhat more pragmatic view on this. I like some precious metals. Maybe you have some in crypto. You have some real estate. You have some cash. I like to have things diversified. That's my pragmatism speaking. So, if someone has $1 million in net worth, or they're making $250,000 a year, that's when it makes sense for me. Because if you're making $250,000 a year in California, you're probably paying $100,000 in tax. And so if we can put that to 20. Right. You're going to get a great ROI on doing a lot of this stuff. If you're making $50,000 a year, it's really maybe worth just kind of keep going, keep building it up, and not fully optimizing your strategy. So I think that, again, there's different perspectives to come at this from. There's the person who comes to me. I had someone recently, Andrew, making $1 million a year, paying $350 in tax. They said, this is rather atypical for me. They said, you know what? We're pretty liberal. We don't want to be funding the U.S. government, but we'd like to pay a little bit of tax somewhere else, and then we'll give some money to charity, right? We just don't like giving it to this government. I said, okay, interesting. So, for them, they want to go live overseas. They want to move all their stuff overseas, and they want to, save $300,000 a year. But there's another kind of person who says, well, let me make the money more quickly, and it'll be easier for me to get to the $1 million because I'm not going to be paying all the tax and dealing with all the stuff all along the way. I'll have lower priced employees in other countries. Yeah. I'll have lower cost of operation. I'll have lower cost of living. So there's nothing wrong with that person going and bootstrapping. It's really a personality discussion of how comfortable do you feel? Are you willing to say, I have $5,000, I'm going to go live in the jungle somewhere in a $200 a month apartment eating papayas, and I'm going to make it work no matter what. And I think there's some value to that. And just saying, I'm to do is a bit more behind us, and that's kind of a decision you have to make for yourself. But I think that you can do that. It's just, I wouldn't come in from day one and say, how do I tax optimize a business that I just started, unless you already have lots of money behind you. Understood.
Okay. I like I like what you're doing. It seems like there's going to be, or if there isn't already, a significant amount of growth in that. As the internet has connected all of us and we continue to become more and more connected, is that actually something that you see, or is that actually happening to you, where you're getting more and more of these inquiries, et cetera?
Well, I think absolutely the market is growing. And what do we have these days? We have, first of all, let's just be honest, what's happening in the United States. I look at some people in my extended family. It's like tough times in the U.S. The middle class is shrinking. This is why you have the political situation that you do. And so I think what that's inspired is more almost kind of forced entrepreneurship, where a lot of people are going out and saying, I don't want to be part of this rat race. I'm going to start my own business. And what are people who are young primarily, but what are people doing? They're doing businesses online. They're selling stuff on Amazon. They are selling stuff through Shopify or Etsy, or they're doing all kinds of stuff that can be done anywhere because they're just it's like the laptop generation, and so that could be portable. And so if you can do it in California, like as you said, I'm thinking of moving maybe to another state. Well, if you can move to Florida, why not move to Panama? What's the real difference? If you can move to Panama, well, now you're open to the whole world. And so I think that, yes, a lot more people are opening up to this. I mean, everything from internet businesses proliferating to the cost of flights going down. I mean, everybody's traveling that I know these days. I mean, so many people are traveling. If you want to travel, you can. The world is becoming so much more open. And I think people are just, it's a natural fit to say, well, hold on a second. California's a terrible place to have a business. What can I do about that?
Yeah.
And so the market is absolutely growing. And the market is niching down, Jay, where I think you have the bootstrappers, but then you also have the guys who I'm talking to who it's like, hey, we're making $1 million. Let's make sure they have a product store nearby. We don't want to be in the jungle on a hammock.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just very, very intrigued by the choices that you're enabling others to make. And I like the fact that you guys are out there being that bridge, if you will, to make that process smoother. Now, with that being said, and I know there's a number of individuals listening who probably have their own set of questions and thoughts and things that they want to get to understand. What's going to be the best way for them to follow up with you and find out more about what you guys are doing?
Let me answer that. Let me just be real clear on something that I like about what you're talking about here, because I want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
There's no right way to do this. And as I said,
Mm-hmm.
The core of your investment strategy could be in the U.S., and that enables you to do stuff overseas. So, people come to me and say, "Oh, do I have to abandon the U.S., leave, and never come back?" And no, that's not the case. There's a right strategy for everyone, and so if people are looking to figure that out. I mean, here's who I think is a good candidate for this in particular. Anyone can go to Georgia and open a bank account. You don't really need any particular need. Obviously, there's laws to follow and there's stuff you need to do, but you can go to Georgia, open a bank account. That might be the way to dip your toe in. Come to Georgia. What do you do? Buy a plane ticket. But I think that people who have online businesses, people who are location independent, they can do it from anywhere. People who are making investments, people who want to make investments and earn higher yields, those people are a good fit. So we have nomadcapitalist.com. We have over 1,300 articles that describe my journey, describe different ideas, different strategies, different tax ideas, second passports, all kinds of stuff. We have 300 YouTube videos. We have a lot of resources. But really, the key thing that I work with people on is people go through an application process on our website to see if they're a good fit. And we accept a small number of folks. And I serve as strategist plus executor plus mentor to make sure the stuff gets done and to make sure it's serving them. Because the biggest challenge that I see when people go offshore is they'll just Google offshore companies. They'll register some offshore company, and then they'll totally disregard U.S. tax law, and they'll get themselves into a bigger problem. So I think that you have to really look at it from what are your objectives. And I think that having done this for so many years, I've gotten pretty good at sorting at objectives. Figure out the objectives and then work backwards to find out what's needed. Don't just go out and get an offshore bank account for no reason or set up an offshore company for no reason, because that's when you get into trouble. They're great tools if used properly.
Understood. Completely understood. Now, as we wind down, I've got a final question for you because I'm kind of curious to hear what your answer is going to be. I'm going to assume that there's someone listening right now who is standing at what I like to call the precipice of decision. They are maybe even standing in front of that superhero outfit store. They're like, you know what? Maybe I can do this. I can run my business and live. I am location independent. Or I'm going to start. I'm going to make this thing happen. And, when we get to those moments of decision, Andrew, you know, like I know, that oftentimes we have a companion, and that companion comes in the form of a voice, and it reminds us of things usually from our past that go, what? You're going to do what? And you're going to, no, you can't start a business. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're going to live where? What's wrong with where you are? Don't you know this place? I mean, it reminds us of all of those things. And for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time they're going to follow through. they're going to do what you say, and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
Well, if you're saying I want to get started with, you're saying moving my business overseas and moving myself overseas, I think that, as I said, you have to be fully comfortable with the process. And that's something that takes time. It's taken me 11 years to get where I am today. I think I could help someone get there in 1 to 2, but you have to just get out there. I mean, I think that booking that plane ticket is number one. The thing that a lot of people get confused about is they think that it has to be perfect on day one. Now, again, if we're going to set up a company, let's make sure the company's set up properly and make sure we know what we're doing. But in terms of the travel piece, you're saying, hey, someone's on the precipice. They want to go out and they want to get out of the comfort zone, get out of the U.S., for example. I would say where you go is not as important. I would say the process of doing it is important. And if I look back at myself, 11 years ago, I had people along the way who encouraged me to keep doing it and to do it more and more and more. And to where now I'm in 22 countries this year, and that's like a real scale back. So, go with your gut. I think the number one thing for an entrepreneur is to go with your gut and find a place that you can go and figure out a way of being overseas. I think that what some people will want to do is they'll want to spend a week in each place and they'll want to be constantly traveling. Other people I know, especially successful entrepreneurs at a high level, they say, I need a month or I need 3 months in each place because anything faster than that, I lose my routine. So if the idea is, I'm ready to jump in and live this global citizen lifestyle, the first thing to do is to move yourself. There's a saying that, back in the 70s, the 80s, the Swiss bank accounts, the things that everyone talks about, which no longer exist, the numbered bank accounts, that stuff's all gone. We live in a new era of transparency and following the law and just using it to your benefit. But back then it was move your assets. Now it's move your ass. You better figure out how that works for you to lifestyle look like. And I'm not here to tell people how they should live their lives, because from a tax, from a business, from a freedom point of view, I'm rather agnostic to whether you're, in a different city every week or moving or finding one place you want to live in. So there's a lot of things that there's a flexibility. The most important is that people can if you are kind of tax planning, there has to be a plan. But just the most important thing is that perfect in it.
Excellent. Now, I just want to say, like I said, I appreciate the what you do, the how you guys are doing it, the example of actually going out there and making it happen as well, for sure. All of those things are important. With that being said, though, I also want to say I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, as well as your insight here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
My pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to nomadcapitalist.com. Why? Because there's a lot to learn and a lot to do. And if unless I miss my guess, it's usually easier to have someone guide you through it. So make sure that, whatever you do, get those objectives in place and make it happen, because at the same time, nothing changes when you're just sitting around reading about it. Now you have a way to go do something about it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. We look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.